Good afternoon, everyone. Setting me up for a fall by telling you in advance it's going to be really interesting, so that's good. I'll apologise in advance because I'm going to talk at some pace. I'm going to launch straight in because there's a huge amount to get through. It's a massive topic, as you might imagine, and I could do probably an hour on each one of the topics, so it's just trying to get a flavour of the various issues that are affecting the legal sector. So the background to this is that, as we all appreciate, is that artificial intelligence, it changes lots of things, but it affects us all in different ways. Some individually, it affects us in work, it affects us in our daily lives. But it also, I think it's probably fair to say that it will be affecting us in ways that we probably haven't even yet thought of. But what is absolutely clear is that it's causing significant legal implications arising out of this, and the whole of the legal sector is struggling to catch up. I think there's going to have to be, and there already has been, changes in legislation. But I think that there's certain aspects that need a wholesale change on established legal principles, some of which have been in play for decades, if not centuries. The use of AI spans across all areas of law, but we all have to take from it what aspect touches each of us. So I'll just launch into a couple of areas. Intellectual property. Who actually owns what is created by artificial intelligence? Just take probably the easiest example for us to all appreciate is music. You can put into any AI product, make me a song, look for lyrics about highways, think about, I want it in the style of country and western, and AI can draw lyrics, it can draw music, it can draw genres, it can mimic famous voices, and you then get to a point where there's a fine distinction between what is unique and what is plagiarized from other people. Think also about AI, as people do, to use it to assist in creating new technologies. Who actually gets credit for that? How do we copyright a new piece of work and patent this invention in those circumstances? Because who owns it? And also, ordinarily, for copyright purposes, you need an individual or an organization, because you need a legal entity to actually own that. So that throws its own challenges up straight away. Inevitably, it will not surprise you to learn data protection. Obviously, the use of personal data is sacrosanct, we all know that. But using AI solutions, what you can't do is abdicate your responsibilities to that. The data security has got to be part and parcel of AI solutions as well. But it goes beyond that. What do we do about manipulating data, using data, the statistical analysis of it? I mean, the beauty of AI is that you can put huge amounts of data from a spreadsheet into an AI model, and it will give you an analysis of it. It will deal with it and manipulate it far quicker and far more accurately than any of us can. But then what? What do you do with it? Because there's a world of difference between data and management information. Data is just numbers. Management information tells us something we can actually use. And getting an AI model to actually manipulate this data and analyze this data and then tell us what the strategic direction of our businesses, our organizations should be is very, very dangerous, of course, because we all know our businesses. We know our quirks, the quirks and nuances of our businesses, seasonal fluctuations, but principally the impact caused by human behavior, because clever as computers are, will a computer ever be able to second guess the idiosyncrasies and the oddities of human behavior and act to counter it? I really do question whether that might struggle. Employment. I mean, this is, I suppose, when we started talking about artificial intelligence, people started worrying, perhaps to a degree justifiably, about how this was going to affect certain industries, creative industries for the start, maybe manufacturing, and whether their roles would be displaced by artificial intelligence. I mean, I suppose thinking about that in the round, is that any different to the Industrial Revolution? Probably not. You know, things come and go. That's life. It's the circle of life. But as always, there's two schools of thought on this. So there's one school that is very worried about this, that people are going to be displaced from their jobs. And some people will need to either retrain within that industry, retrain to go outside of that industry, and there'll be a certain demographic who simply say, I've had enough, I'm just going to retire because my industry has changed immeasurably. Take the other school of thought. My son's in his late 20s and works in digital marketing. So just to give you an example, one of the things he does is when you've been Googling suitcases and then you go on Facebook and see suitcases appear, that's his fault. That's what he does. So I apologise in advance for him. But he isn't worried about AI replacing him. He's actually excited by it because he says he can do his job better, quicker and more effectively because of the use of AI. So there's always that flip between threat and opportunity. Recruitment. We all have staff, we all recruit people, and no one needs to be reminded of how time-consuming recruitment is. Sifting through dozens of applications, reading countless CVs. Also, we've got to be mindful of documenting what we find, making sure that all our decisions are objectively measured. Now, you could get an AI solution to sift through the CVs and counteract that against the role profile, so it can then show who should be interviewed and who shouldn't, prioritize people, and as soon as you start going down that line, it's very easy to see how abdicating that responsibility to a computer modelling, to an AI solution, is very dangerous indeed, leaving employers open to claims of bias, discrimination, you name it. But it actually goes further than that, and I've mentioned there on the slides, Article 22 of GDPR that became enshrined in law in the Data Protection Act 2018. This actually precludes and states that a data subject has the right not to be the subject of automated processing, which may give rise to an adverse legal effect. So you can see we're in danger of not only being unethical, but we're in danger of actually breaching the law. And this is something that the world needs to liven up to understand whether the law needs to catch up and whether this is sacrosanct or whether we can abdicate part of this to computers. So I mentioned briefly about ethics. It's not a legal issue per se, but it's worthy of mention because there is, of course, a fine line between what helps us and what's intrusive in our lives. And I go back to my example of my son with the suitcases. You know, is that helpful? Because you clearly need a new suitcase, you've been Googling it. And it's helping you by bringing the adverts to you. Or is that intrusive? Because you want to look for suitcases when you want to look for them. I mean, I've lost count of the number of times my wife and I have been watching television and then up pipes from the other room, Google Home, that says, I can't help you with that. We weren't even talking to it, but it's been listening, and it's worrying how intrusive some of this information, some of this technology is. Education. I mean, use of computers is nothing new, of course, in our world. But think about the difference between not only using computers to train us, but using an AI model that assesses our staff, our colleagues, on whether they need refresher training. That's a wholesale shift. I mean, if you get a computer to determine whether someone needs training, because we all of course have legal training within our world. You know, in the construction industries, you've got working at height, you've got PPE, you've got health and safety. In my world, it's anti-bribery, it's anti-money laundering, it's data protection, that sort of thing. But as soon as we abdicate the responsibility for determining whether someone actually needs to be retrained or have refresher training, how concerning might that be? Because the corollary to that is that we're abdicating to a computer modelling device to determine whether someone is competent to do their job, competent to drive an HGV, competent to drive a forklift truck, fly an aeroplane. I think we've all got a view on that. The big one, of course, which will probably touch most people in this room, is liability. Who is actually responsible for the actions of an artificial intelligence model? Because if you think about the various stages and the slices of this, if an AI model causes damage or breach, who's responsible? Is it the developer of that product? Because they created the product. Is it the manufacturer or the organization that built it because the product was great but they didn't put it together correctly? Or is the liability on the part of the purchaser? They actually didn't know what they were buying, or perhaps did but assumed it could be used for their industry, but actually they've tried to push a round peg in a square hole because it wasn't actually designed for that, or perhaps they didn't train their staff to use it correctly. All of these things could be where the wheels come off. And then, of course, then as soon as there's damage as a result of that, there's liability, there's a claim, there's costs to be paid. But then, of course, once you've had to pay because you're primarily culpable for that loss, you're then looking for somebody else to blame. So this propagates secondary litigation. And then, of course, if some of this technology was built overseas, it then brings in jurisdictional issues. So you can see this is a very, very complicated area indeed. But just to give you an example, I mean, the best example is, of course, autonomous vehicles, because that's the one that people can most associate with. And we've all heard of problems where people computers are not infallible, of course. We've seen on the news buses getting stuck under bridges, people slavishly following sat-nav and ending up in a stream, that type of thing. And this is where legislation has to keep to catch up. And the legal profession is not the quickest at catching up with these things. But there has been a lot of movement in this area. The Automated and Electric Vehicles Act 2018 was designed to just reinforce that the world is changing. And this, one of the principal thrusts of this is it changes the thrust of liability from the driver to the insurer. Because what they anticipated was that insurers would say, well, either if you're not in control of the vehicle, you can't be insured because you weren't controlling that vehicle, or at the very least, you weren't protecting insurable property, which is a central thrust of all insurance policies. So what this does, it basically says, if you're in autonomous mode, and that's what it's been designed to do, then you're not liable as a driver, the insurer is liable. But then, of course, it brings in the spectre of secondary litigation once again. And then, almost unheard of, another Act of Parliament within 6 years relating to the same thing, the Automated Vehicles Act 2024. This dealt with principally motoring offences. So this is if someone's perhaps gone through a stop sign or gone over the speed limit because the computer modelling says it's okay to do a 70 on this road, but actually it had reduced to 50 and the computer hadn't picked it up, that type of thing. That deals with traffic offences, but there are certain aspects that stay with the driver, such as non-payment of tolls and non-payment of parking charges. And interestingly, it still retains with the driver the offence of using a mobile phone whilst driving, which seems a very curious one, because I always thought the whole concept of the offence of driving whilst using your mobile phone was because it was taking your attention away from driving the vehicle, but this is an autonomous vehicle where you don't have to do that. So it's a bit of an oddity. So it's quite clear there's still a bit of work to do, and the legal profession is still trying to catch up with this. But just to sort of finish up, liability for using AI we can all understand, but what about liability for not overriding AI or not using AI in the first place? We can see where liability could lie with an employer for failing to train. I mean, that's a negative. It's not something you're doing, it's something you're failing to do. Possibly failing to override AI. The car I got last year has got self-park mode, and I thought, I'll give this a whirl and it'll be really fun and it'll be great. And it frightened the life out of me because it just took over. Now, I stamped on the brake and overrode the system, but would there be a liability had I not done that, or was it in self-drive mode so it wasn't my responsibility? So you can see it brings up a legal conundrum, because ordinarily, it is a positive act that gives liability, not an omission, except in certain circumstances. I mean, most of the highways people in the room will, of course, be familiar with the Highways Act. So Section 41 specifically says you've got to maintain the highway, and failing to do that makes you liable. So that's a specific legislation that tells you an omission is liable, but ordinarily it isn't. So to give you an example, if I push you under a bus, then of course I'm criminally liable. But if I can see that you're going to walk in front of a bus because you're on your phone and not paying attention, and I could stop you but fail to do so, or decide I'm just not going to bother, and you walk in front of a bus, no liability on me whatsoever, because that's an omission, and that's what the legal world is wrestling with at the moment, that omissions piece. But what about not using AI in the first place? So consider two hospitals. One which uses AI modelling for screening, let's say, precancerous cells in breast cancer patients. And the technology has been tested and says that it can scan the scans 10 times faster than the best consultant. Of course, getting ahead of that, people get treatment quicker, so it improves life expectancy. But what about the second hospital who doesn't do that for whatever reason? They don't believe the technology, they haven't got the money. Are they liable for the fact that people don't get the treatment as quickly and life expectancy goes down? Again, it's an omission, but it brings in a legal conundrum there. So we might be heading towards the balance of risk of trading off speed and efficiency and cost effectiveness against the chance of, if something goes wrong, it's unlikely to go wrong, but we'll take that risk. And then, controversially, I just mentioned at the bottom there, Lord Justice Voss, who's the master of the role, so one of the most senior judges in the country, was speaking to the Professional Negligence Bar Association just last year, and he commented that lawyers could be negligent for not using AI rather than for using it incorrectly. Pretty controversial stuff. I'm mindful that I'm standing between you and your lunch, so it's a brave man that does that. I'm also mindful I've posed more questions than I've actually answered here. I mean, I've got a personal and professional view about some of the areas, but this is an ongoing project, and I think it's fair to say that certainly a work in progress. Thank you.